When we ended the last session, we knew that we would have a large supplemental cost for Medicaid that would have to be paid in the 2013 session. What would you say the estimate of that cost is now?
The most recent estimate that I've heard from Commissioner Straus was offered actually in this room about 3 weeks ago, and he offered up $4.7 billion, which is a reasonable estimate for that shortfall.
Okay, and what else do you expect we'll have to pay for in the supplemental bill?
There are a couple of items that we have been tracking. I mean, one of the things that that everybody knows about are some additional costs associated with recovery from wildfires from last summer. We're not out of this year's season yet, so those could still grow. Those are tracking about $180 million. There was also testimony a few weeks ago about a supplemental demand for correctional managed health care. I think that testimony was $60 million. There are a few other areas that that we're always monitoring. We might see more things when agency appropriation requests come in. There's some moving parts happening right now in the foundation school program that could drive some additional supplemental costs.
Okay, so it's reasonable to say that when we come back, we'll need to pass a supplemental appropriations bill somewhere in the neighborhood of $5 billion.
That is a not unreasonable number for a supplemental need.
Okay, and our public education enrollment typically increases by about 80,000 students per year. Do you expect that trend to continue? And if you do, how much do you expect enrollment growth to cost the next budget?
Students are tracking at about 80,000 a year, right around 2%. It's actually, in the last couple of years, been tracking a little bit low. We have no reason to know if that's going to really track up or down again. It'll probably tick up a little bit. The amount of money that actually went in for enrollment growth 2 years ago was about $2.2 billion. And that is $2 billion is a reasonable rule of thumb estimate for the cost of those additional students.
And enrollment in higher education is also increasing. How much do you expect enrollment growth there to cost?
Higher ed is a little bit of a different analysis. Higher ed funding is driven entirely by appropriation. It's whatever you decide to spend, on higher ed. One piece of analysis that we like to do is looking at the cost of increasing students while keeping the rate for institutions the same. I think 2 years ago, I think that number was about $800 million. I would expect that to be lower this time because the rates are lower because of the reductions that happened 2 years ago, last session. I don't have a good estimate for that.
Okay, and since 2003, our Medicaid caseloads have grown by nearly 53%. And during the same time period, the cost per recipient has increased 41%. We expect these trends to continue, and the same question as before. If you do, what would that cost be?
We don't yet have a caseload estimate for the upcoming biennium for Medicaid. It's something that we'll work on. We'll get some data from the commission. We'll work up a projection for that cost. It's kind of too early in the process to estimate that yet. I don't see any reason for historical growth trends to shift, particularly in either Medicaid or any area of healthcare, which is our fastest growing cost sector right now. So I don't have an estimate of that for you. What I would say, what I would remind everybody of, is that the supplemental need for Medicaid that you're going to have to put into a supplemental bill will increase the base, and that will be a cost again that would be incurred going forward. Paying for that, those same months that you didn't pay for in the regular bill, paying for those months in the supplemental bill.
So
a full cohort.
4.7 times 2.
Again, so to handle that full cost of Medicaid, you've got to roll that forward.
Okay, $9.4 billion. We're spending nearly $1 billion on health care for our prisoners. Do we expect that cost to increase?
Yeah, you heard me mention a moment ago that we're facing a supplemental demand for correctional managed health care. It seems to be an area, even though it's not one of the biggest cost drivers at certain areas, sort of perennial budgetary uncertainty, I would say. I don't expect that to shift. Again, all healthcare costs are high. Pharmaceuticals, medical services, medical supplies are all big cost drivers across the whole budget. And the prison population is one with a high incidence of hepatitis C, diabetes, some other diseases that require ongoing treatment. So I don't expect that to shift.
So between public education, higher education, Medicaid, prison health care, we could be looking at increased spending demands of about $9 billion. And that's not expanding government. That's just more people and some impact of inflation.
Yeah, everything that you've described is really the effect of more people and ongoing costs in certain areas, addressing things that you knew at the end of last session were going to need to be addressed, and then rolling those forward. One thing that I didn't mention earlier that I will remind everybody of, since I can, is that you did a deferral in the foundation school program last session. The net effect of that is that you paid for one fewer month, and that you'll have to make that month up again next time. That deferral, again, is in the neighborhood of $2 billion. And so that's something else that just walking into next session you'll have to address.
Okay, thank you. And a few weeks ago now, I spoke to the Appropriations Subcommittee of Representative Darby's about the need for action in the next session on the use of dedicated accounts to help balance our budget. Is it correct to say that we're using about $4.9 billion for certification? And doesn't this practice skew the true picture of the state's finances?
Last session you did use about $4.9 billion in GRD balances to certify the budget. If you want to get into the budget certification process, I would call my colleagues back up to the table if you really want to get into the process that the controller uses for doing that.
No, I just want to get to the number.
But yes, it's $4.9 billion, and to the extent that you choose to not do that in the future, that just reduces the amount of revenue that you have available for other purposes.
Okay, thank you, Ursula. That was a sobering but important look at the cost drivers of our budget. I think it's safe to say our economy has grown faster than projected, but these numbers show that it will be a huge challenge to address growth in population and inflation in our next session, let alone addressing infrastructure needs the state is facing in areas of water, transportation, and the like. And public education and higher education, Medicaid, and prisons already account for 85% of our budget. Rising Medicaid costs increase that percentage. I look forward to working with the members of the LBB and all the members of the legislature to find efficiencies in state government to scrutinize these cost drivers in our budget and help come up with some solutions that will help us properly fund our priorities at a cost that taxpayers can afford. Are there any questions for Ursula?
Ursula, good morning.
Governor.
When you were talking about the Medicaid supplement and the number that Commissioner